Welcome and thank you for joining us today for the AHRMM webinar, Supply Chain's Role in Non-Labor Expense Management. Hi everyone, this is Mike Schiller, Senior Director of Supply Chain at AHRMM, and I will be moderating today's webinar, which is the third in our CQO Thought Leader Discussion Series, Reengineering the Healthcare Supply Chain. These webinars are made possible by AHRMM's CQO movement sponsors, Vizient, Cook Medical, Health Trust, Premier, Nexera and Acurity, and Pampers. The AHRMM CQO movement frames the critical role supply chain professionals play in driving high-quality care at a more affordable cost to deliver greater value to patients. Some housekeeping items for today's call. All lines have been placed in a listen-only mode, but you can ask questions by typing them in the Q&A box. The Q&A box can be opened by hovering your mouse at the bottom of the WebEx browser, clicking the ellipses icon, the one with the three dots, and clicking Q&A. The Q&A will be held towards the end of today's session. After today's webinar, please complete the presentation evaluation so AHRMM can improve our education for you and other healthcare supply chain professionals. AHRMM members will receive their continuing education certificate about 2 weeks after completing the survey. We are pleased to welcome two healthcare supply chain leaders to today's call to share their success in managing non-labor expense within their organizations. Please join me in welcoming Eric Swaim, Manager of Strategic Sourcing and Vendor Management at Texas Children's Hospital, and Amanda Shala, Vice President for Supply Chain at Stanford Healthcare and Stanford Lucile Packard Health. Thank you both for joining us today. And now I'd like to turn the presentation over to Eric to share the great work they have done at Texas Children's. Eric, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. As mentioned, I'm Eric Swaim. I'm going to spend about 10 minutes talking a little bit high level about our program, and then about 10 minutes from a tactical perspective, how you actually do the work. Just briefly about Texas Children's, if you don't know who we are, we're the largest pediatric hospital in the world, ranked 4th by U.S. World News. Our base is in Austin, but we recently expanded into the Austin market a couple of years ago. We have over 800 beds and close to 100 non-acute sites, with about a 500,000 member health plan, all supported by one supply chain team. From an NPE perspective, this has really been our journey. And when I say NPE, it's interchangeable with NLE, non-labor expense, non-personnel expense. And for purposes of this slide deck, I've really focused on our services and software program, but of course there's a whole journey on the med-surg side as well. And really our journey started in 2015 when we set out a goal to establish a purchase services committee to look at cost savings opportunities within software and services. We set a goal of about $5 million, and a year after that we achieved that goal. At that time we took a step back. We said, where did we have success? Where can we build on that success? And then once again we set out with a lofty goal of about $6 million. We created 3 subcommittees, mainly because of the difference in spend and the amount of spend within those spaces, health plan, biomed, and IS. And then about 6 months later, we started putting some teeth to our program. We implemented a formal competitive procurement policy procedure. We achieved our goal for the second year in a row, and we formally created the strategic sourcing area that I now oversee. A couple of months later, we set out another goal of $8 million and achieved that, and we were invited to participate in the budget process about a year ago and incorporated in there. About 8 months ago, we finished our hiring of our staff, moved to the category model, and once again set out with a savings goal of about $20 million for FY20, which we achieved about 2 months ago, if you look at May 2020 in the top right. In addition to that, we were rolled into the ERP Finance Budget Committee, and currently today we're in process of loading our $20 million in achievement into the bottom line budget, as well as beginning planning for next fiscal year. So that's really been our qualitative journey. And what I wanted to show the group is the metrics behind it, because it's not enough to tell the story. You got to prove with the numbers that your program is working. And really, when I look at this, I focus on 3 individual metrics. The first one is the spend addressing, which is the third from the top. And really, what we try to focus on is addressing about 25% to 30% of our annual operational spend in a given year. So if you do the math, you end up looking at about at every agreement and every spend about every 3 to 4 years. So this year we are at $185 million, which is about 26%, so right on target with that metric. The other 2 metrics that we look at are percent of return on spend. So when we get involved, how successful are we at reducing our expenses or increasing our revenue? And right now we're sitting at about 11.4%, which is pretty good. I'd like to see us closer to about 14%. I think that number is a little deflated because of some of the larger ones we did this year, like pharmacy distribution, but 11.4% is very good. And then percent of return per FTE. When we went in to build our strategic business case to expand our group, we promised a return of 9 to 1 per FTE. Most third-party organizations will come in and offer you 4 to 1 or 5 to 1. So if you're looking to build a program in-house, you really have to do better than that. So our target was anywhere from 7 to 1 to 9 to 1. We've are currently at 16.6 to 1. And then at the bottom here, I just thought I'd list for the group some key dependencies that we've learned along the way. And I won't read through all of these, but I wanted to touch base on a couple of them. The first one up here to the top left is get quick wins. If all of your projects take 8 months to 12 months or larger than 12 months, you lose momentum. You need to have those quick wins, which are typically utilization type opportunities where you can spin off, address an area quickly within a 1 month or 2 months and grab those quick wins. The second one that I wanted to touch on is key partners. So those first ones there, TA and comp, that would be talent acquisition and compensation. You got to hire the right people. You got to hire them with the right skill set, and you got to hire them at the right price. Without that key partnership, you're going to build the wrong team with the wrong skill set, so it is definitely critical to the long-term success of your non-labor expense program. Finance, being an advocate for you to push savings projects during the budget process is a great voice to have on your team. And then the last 2 there, IT and facilities, just because of the amount of spend that typically goes on in that area from a non-labor perspective. I mean, you can get on a call with IT vendor, negotiate a software agreement, and move the margin by about 60% in a 30-minute call. So teaming up with your IT team, your CIO, is definitely valuable. The next one I wanted to touch on was value management, and I wish this one was blown up like 72-point font and across the PowerPoint, because this is what it really comes down to. It's not what you can get at the cheapest price, but weighing the value with the cost that you're paying for it. So you could go completely cheap, but as many of you probably know, the cheapest isn't always the cheapest. So where do you find that right balance? Where do you go the cheapest, or where do you go the highest quality and pay a premium for it? And then the last one I wanted to touch on is the technology to sustain. This is one where I definitely think Texas Children still has opportunity to work. But if your team's looking at all this spend year after year and you don't have the controls in place to sustain it, then you won't be able to realize the savings long term. So along with those quantitative metrics, this is our current structure today. I will tell you that this has changed over the last couple of years, but essentially you'll see the opportunities here at the bottom that get pushed up through our strategic sourcing and value analysis team. And then we essentially present them on an annual basis to the Executive Budget Steering Committee, which is made up of your senior leadership in the operational areas, so lab, OR, pharmacy, IT, facilities, and they essentially prioritize the projects and the margin improvement projects we'll work on. And then based off of that, we will do a budget loading of the savings into the budget. And one of the 4 committees you see there will essentially manage the monthly updates and those projects to completion. So the Smart NPE group is the group that actually replaced the Purchase Services Committee. That was the change that I was alluding to, which is IT, facilities, lab, rev cycle, FP&D, you name it. The ORPEC is our OR Products and Equipment Committee, which is your med-surg and equipment standardization group. CPEC is the Clinical Products Equipment Committee, EC, PICU, respiratory, some of those other areas. And then P&T, this is our 340B optimization group, our pharmacy automation, really pharmacy focused within that group. The one other critical factor that I wanted to point out about this structure is to the right. One of the things that we noticed early on is you can stand up multiple structures within your organization, but if you don't have alignment to the other processes, you'll run into barriers. And so the one that I always like to point out that was critical is the IT PMO, so Project Management Office. When you start to look at a lot of these service opportunities, a lot of them will have IT components. So you need to be aligned with your IT team to strive to actually implement a lot of these opportunities that your team spends a lot of time actually finding. The next slide, I'm just going to glaze over, but I do think it's important that every group establishes guiding principles within their area. This was actually an exercise I did with my team about a month ago, which was good because it proved that all of the team kind of has the same vision and mission and approaches everything very similarly. But I would definitely recommend establishing this within your area. And then the last kind of high-level slide before we get into the nitty-gritty, but this is our 7-step process with how we approach everything. I don't know why everything is always 7 steps, but our process is 7 steps. So if I take an example category, let's say EVS, and I start it from left to right, the first step would be to profile the category. So in an EVS contract, your spend drivers are typically a cost per square foot or a fixed rate by location. We would identify which vendors we have, performing those services, and also what internal staff we have performing those services to really get a full view of the entire category. And number 2, we would perform market analysis. Is this something that we have national representation from vendors, regional, local? We've noted some vendor partners there that we utilize for benchmarking. And then number 3 I highlighted as critical because this is really what separates a traditional program from a more modern non-labor expense program, which is to identify your strategy. So in the more traditional programs, what would happen is you would just try to address price and maybe standardization and go to the vendor and ask for a better price. But really, if you look at the arrow there, there's about 6 value levers that we go in and we look at from an opportunity perspective, being price, standardization, which probably everyone's familiar with, utilization, how we're consuming those software services and products, make versus buy. Should we be outsourcing this or insourcing this based off of, the financials? Revenue, do we have a revenue generating opportunity here? And then strategic alliance or joint venture opportunity. After that, you get to 4 and 5, which is aligning with the end user and actually moving forward with that strategy. And then number 6 is important as well because it's the actual implementation. So it's not enough to find the opportunity in a non-labor program, but you have to deliver. And then number 7 it is tracking the overall savings. So what I'm going to do is I wanted to point out some sample categories. In the top 3, I'm going to skip over because I have subsequent slides that drill in a level deeper on these sample categories, but I thought it'd be helpful to walk through some examples of how we approach stuff. And so here's not an exhaustive list, but just an example of a wide range of categories that we've looked at with more of a focus on services and software. So those first 2, benefits verification, bad debt, those are more revenue cycle focused. Lab courier, giving a plug to my previous slide on getting quick wins. That was one where we were paying for a lab courier to ship a cooler to our main campus, and then we were paying for a route back to redeliver the cooler. So we went in and we said, why don't you buy 20 coolers? We saved 10% off that total spend. Quick hit, spin off, addressed it, moved on. The next one, sign consulting, maintenance, non-capital repairs. Those are facilities related. Skipping 2 down, genetic testing, lab, related. You'll see that we moved on price, and now we're addressing the strategic alliance opportunity. And then moving down, recruitment process outsourcing. I don't know if people on the call have HR departments that are outsourced, but this is one, when you think about value management, going back to that point, you could have a recruitment process outsourcing that's extremely transactional and cheap, or you could have one with a dedicated recruitment model, more hands-on at a higher dollar, but knowing where your organization falls, that's how you'll address the opportunity that you can't get at. And then general contractors, construction, help desk, and software rationalization are current projects that we're initiating as a part of the FY21 budget planning process. So what I'll do now is I'll get into furniture moves and standards. So this was an opportunity that we initiated in 2015 as a high-impact team. Now what a high-impact team is we set out to address a category to save money. We assigned a certain project team that you can see there to the left, and they had 4 weeks to come up with a strategy with supply chain and obtain approval by senior executive leadership. This is a process that has worked well for us multiple times, and so we use it as a budget blitz every single year now. And so the current state of this was that we were outsourcing our vendor furniture moves, adds, changes, and seeing an increase by about 20% over the last 3 years. And then in addition to that, there was a thought across the organization that our furniture standard was very high. Now we were paying a lot for furniture, and so the two value levers that we pulled were utilization, our standard of furniture, and the make versus buy. Can we insource the moves, adds, and changes? So you'll see at the bottom there, as a part of the results, we saved 60% on the insourcing opportunity in year one and about 75% in year two after. We reduced our furniture cost by 15% by focusing on individual item reductions by changing the standard, which ranged anywhere from 20 to 40%. And on top of that, going back to value management, we increased our service levels on insourcing. So the department got more people, the end users got a better quality service, and we saved 75% a year doing it. And then just to get into drill down even further, here's the insourcing breakdown we did to the left. You have your salaries, benefits, operational costs of trucks, dollies, tools. And then to the right, here's just an example of how we laid out the opportunities without obviously showing dollars, but moving from one chair to the next, I think saved us about 25%. The next opportunity I wanted to talk about in two phases, because if you noticed on the other slide, one of the key dependencies I wrote was revisit items, know what hills to die on. And so those two are applicable here. So in phase one of language services, which was one of our first projects that we addressed in 2015, we were utilizing 3 vendors across the system for in-person interpretation, 2 for over the phone, and limited video interpretation, less than 3% utilization. Right off the bat, we also noticed that there was a different percentage and mode of interpretation across the locations, which means they had different utilization practices and triage methods for how they would use either in-person, phone, or video. We had inconsistent service levels, which is no surprise because we had different vendors. And so we set out with the goal to standardize among the vendors to reduce costs and have consistent service levels. So this was in 2015 when we really didn't have a good footprint for sourcing or have the buy-in across the organization, which you'll see in potential barriers. So what we did is we just addressed price and standardization. We took it out to RFP across all of our entities, which we have 7, and we selected one vendor for video and in-person, and another vendor for over the phone, which saved us 20% across the system. We ended up with consistent service levels, and we got a more technology-adopted platform with video adoption. So that was phase 1. Phase 2, fast forward to 4 years later, 2020 to today. One of the things that we did when we profiled the categories, we noticed that we're using 2 vendors now for in-person. So as we drilled into that, we had missed jobs. with the first vendor. So going back to value management, the vendor could not provide 138 languages across 110 sites from a geography perspective. And so we ended up with two vendors, and one vendor for over the phone that was holding stable, but then our utilization on our video had gone up by 25% from 3%. And then even furthermore, as we drilled into the in-person spend, which has still gone up, we were about 86% Spanish related. And we still had different policies related to triage. So now as a more established and mature program, our goal is to review the make versus buy opportunity, RFP for reduced video rate, since now it's more of a commoditized service, and identify utilization policies where you'll have the same mode of interpretation used by campus. So you'll see the 4 boxes highlighted in yellow. This one is TBA because we haven't finished it yet, but I did want to give a glimpse on how stuff changes, why it's necessary to revisit items, and how you can go in with just addressing one value lever and then coming back and addressing the other ones. So if I take it a step further, I just wanted to provide a visual for how, if you looked at all 4 value levers, it would address this area. And these are not our price points at Texas Children's. If they're your price points, you should take it out to RFP immediately. But in the bottom there, let's start with the questions. So these would be the questions that we would ask the end users when we go to profile the category. So does your department have policies determining mode of interpretation used? So if they say no, you automatically know you have a utilization opportunity. If they say yes, and your data suggests that there's inconsistencies, you might have a retraining opportunity or an opportunity to revisit. What is your over-the-phone experience and service levels? That could be a pointed, standardized question. It's easier to do conversions for services if you point to the service level inconsistencies. So that would be a question to target standardization. Are you currently paying a minimum to in-person interpreters or travel and expenses? This is actually a loaded question. This is price related, because should you be paying travel and expenses? This is utilization related, because should you be using so much in person? And this is a make versus buy question, right? If we're setting up appointments for 8 hours a day for interpreters, should you really be outsourcing that, or should you insource that? So then move to the slide in the top left, or the table, I'm sorry. And so this is just an example. In person, let's say you had 2 vendors, $45 an hour, 3 million minutes. I converted it to minutes. So you're at 40% in person, 46% over the phone, and 14% video. Now, knowing that in person is the most expensive, video being second, over the phone being the least, you can see based off of the value levers, kind of the table in the bottom right on how we got there. And so addressing utilization, in this example, we moved 5% of the utilization to phone from in-person. We moved 5% from in-person to video. And then by RFPing it, we were able to reduce the price. And then we were also able to insource to get 10 people to reduce costs. So taking these examples, it would be about a 10% reduction or $1 million annually. Okay? And then lastly, the last example, I just wanted to touch base on a quick hit one. This is when we look at quarterly, our internal shuttle system, because ridership just changes. So on the left there, it's the number of shuttles by route per hour. And to the right is the ridership that we had per month. So in this opportunity, we looked at it, must have taken the category manager a day to get the data. And from 12 a.m. to 1 a.m. and 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. on Feigen Direct, we got rid of that route, saved $100,000, and moved on. So from our program's perspective, what's next? I think we need to work on refining the budget, cost savings, integration process to ensure these items are hitting the bottom line and hitting them consistently. We're going to further roll out our vendor management, supplier relationship management program, which will be further jump-started this year. We're going to partner with HR to further do make versus buy opportunities for strategic business case items. We just announced we're opening up a hospital in Austin. Being Houston-based, should we really be hiring a bunch of people, or should we be looking at those opportunities to outsource and save money and not have to spend a ton of overhead on the infrastructure? And then finally, implement technology to sustain the controls on the achievements that we've made. Thank you all for letting me present. I look forward to your questions later on.
Eric, thank you so much for sharing that great detailed information. I love the structure, how you laid out your team, and that's some tremendous growth, 3 FTEs to 10, I think, in just over 1 year. And very aggressive, 2,200 contracts you guys are going to be looking at this year. So it is a good thing you do have those 10 FTEs, but very, very impressive with what you've done. I really like what you talked about, the traditional model that was just product price focused, solely product price focused, versus the new model with your various savings levers. And I think the key in all of this, right, is being able to sustain the momentum. And I like the fact that you've gone back and you're looking at your translation services contract again, right? So it's not one and done. So excellent. Again, thank you so much. And now I'd like to turn the presentation over to Amanda to share the work her and her team have done at Stanford Healthcare. Amanda, the floor is all yours.
Great. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Eric. Excellent presentation. I, too, have some learnings from you, so I appreciate that. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'll start off. My presentation will be more of a conversation regarding the structure, the approach, what non-labor spend program looks like, our evolution journey, and kind of where we're headed. A little bit about Stanford Medicine. We are located in Northern California, primarily in the Bay Area. Multiple legal entities, multiple legally different entities in terms of the hospitals, in which each of the hospitals have their own C-suite, their own hospital board that ultimately report into a university board. Supply chain is unique in the sense that we are a shared corporate service across these entities. And so that makes our job fun and challenging at the same time. Going into kind of the next slide here, a little bit about kind of philosophically where we are in terms of the vision and approach of bringing the different entities together across Stanford Medicine. Is really around kind of our 3 pillars to be a top end-to-end healthcare supply chain. And it's about how we source, how we're clinically integrated, and operational excellence. One of the firm beliefs that we have is supply chain is the foundation of supply chain is part of what we consider our value equation, which fundamentally is how we operationalize at our organization. So taking the value equation and saying, this is how it translates into supply chain from a quality standpoint. What does that mean? That means for us adopting best practices, investing in technological advancements. A clinically integrated supply chain has been a significant focus of ours over the past several years in terms of our journey. It's about a united partnership and collaboration with our providers, our clinicians, operators. It's using directional data and opportunities. It's about understanding the true cost to deliver care and the value and the efficacy elements. And so that's a little bit about, in terms of how we're structured and kind of the clinically integrated supply chain. Going into the next slide, we're going to focus obviously on the non-labor spend program. Sorry, give me one moment here. Apologize. Focusing a little bit on the non-labor spend program here. We all know that non-labor spend is the second largest expense category following labor. And, with the pandemic and COVID, the burning platform, I would say, has never been greater. I think I've read some materials out there that, according to Becker, at least 29 hospitals this year have filed for bankruptcy, citing challenges due to COVID. And as a society and a community, we've all been impacted, or we know somebody that's been impacted. And the expectation on unemployment rates and the rate that they're going to continue is going to remain until 2024, according to projections. COVID's expected to cost around $16 million. And so if you don't have a burning platform at your organization, you should have the burning platform now to get the organizational alignment around non-labor spend. Our philosophical approach around non-labor spend at Stanford is a C-sponsored. It is an executive-led expense management strategy. Supply chain does not own non-labor spend, but we are the supportive arms. We are the ones that provide the intellect, the insights. We help with the negotiations. We help with the category management. But really, it needs to be owned by our partners all across the organization, our operational leaders. Fundamentally and culturally, we believe it's a strategic imperative. It's about accountability. Stanford is very much an academic medical center. We are very much also a children's hospital, and we are very much a community hospital. So it's bringing those three distinct hospitals and cultures together to say this is a strategic imperative. What we have fundamentally designed, as we have said, this is not a supply chain program. This is not just category management working on expense reductions. And it's not a temporary fix. It's not about, let me just slash this price and walk away. I've done what I need to do. So philosophically, that's how we have communicated and engaged buy-in from our organizations on what non-labor spend is. In terms of our approach, like Eric, we've been on a multi-year journey. I believe our journey started around 2016-17 timeframe. Each year, we do a reflection, we do a refinement. We change our structure a little bit. We add some additional benchmarks. We may add other departments into the program, but it is a refinement. We have invested a lot on the infrastructure design. It is category management based. It is category management supported. But again, philosophically, and I'll get into kind of the visual of what the non-labor spend structure is, the program itself, non-labor spend management, is ran by the business. It is not ran by supply chain, even though supply chain is that supportive arm. To give you a perspective of kind of the journey that we've been on, these different graphics here represent different years and different times. But some of the things that we've had to figure out is, how do we get organizational engagement? What is our process in which somebody has an idea, ground up? How do we look at benchmarks and engage with that? How do we go from identification to discussion to implementation, and then to verification and validation and link it to the budget? And then the graphic here on the right is, again, this was probably a 2-year-old graphic here. This was, how we had looked at non-labor spend in the past in terms of, let's break it out. Where do we think the dollar goals are and the opportunities? And below is a dashboard, and this dashboard has evolved a little bit, but it's broken out into the different stages and the different subcommittees in which the non-labor spend task force is designed. What's really important about the dashboard is the visibility and the organizational engagement about it, because it is a living and breathing document that is shared broadly across the organizations and the enterprise. In terms of our structure, so similar to Eric, we have, our non-medical, we have medical. We have not broken that out into other areas. I'll talk a little bit about how value analysis fits into the medical structure. Then we've got pharmacy, and then what we have is really clinical optimizations. The chairs for non-labor spend of these subcommittees are really at the administrative director, executive director, senior level of certain departments. So non-medical, our greatest expenses are in information technology, facilities, and support services. So those departments are going to, be the co-chairs, since they make up a majority of the spend. The co-chairs may transition year over year depending on where the spend opportunity is. The intent here is to bring alignment and engagement. On the medical side, it's primarily our interventional platform. And this year, we decided to change it from nursing to ancillary. We go back and forth depending upon where the opportunities are. In pharmacy, it's a dyadic leadership. And clinical optimization, this is where our quality process improvement leaders come into play. And this is where we may have some soft savings that may not be hard dollars, but it's really about fundamentally changing the way in which we operate from an expense structure and an expense standpoint. And so when you're looking at this program structure, value analysis, or what we call at Stanford value-based selection, really fits into the medical category. And so we've got the traditional, VBS committees, the interventional PPI focus. We've got a general nursing one. But you'll see there's dotted lines. And really what the dotted lines here represent is there's a programmatic responsibility of these focus committees to report in centrally. So it truly is a centralized program across Stanford Medicine. This box here on the left-hand side, the CSRP, this is just a physician engagement strategy for aligned incentives. And, you know, I'll skip through this slide. This just goes into kind of our value-based selection philosophically, how we make decisions. I think the point here is it's not about price. It's about all these other elements that come together when we are looking at VBS. But all of this does report, again, into the medical structure. So principally, we too have some key principles. These key principles have been revised. They were revised a few months ago, I believe back in May timeframe, in which we said, okay, what is it that we're trying to do given kind of, you know, the pandemic that we're in? And we said, look, safety and quality, we aren't going to compromise that. COVID-19, it is going to be a priority. We are going to invest there, but it's going to be within reason. The work that we're doing, you know, can't impact revenue generation, and we have to work within regulatory guidelines. I bring this forward because at times you have to look at your key principles of your programs and say, is it relevant to the situation that it is? Now, these key principles may or may not be relevant a year from now, but they are relevant to the way that we're operating our non-labor spent programs today. Going back to kind of the committee structure, so our reporting sponsors are the C-suite, and it's across all three hospitals. And then the programmatic chairs is actually myself and one of my colleagues who's another executive leader, because we wanted to have a department as well as a supply chain owned program chair. And then what we've got is the various subcommittees. And you'll notate here in red, this really represents the chairs of these subcommittees. And then in black represents the participants and the departments in which are required. One thing that's not called out here, but that is a given, is our category management team is a member of each one of these committees. In fact, they're the supportive member that bring the information forward and actually support in the way in which the committee runs, as well as the opportunities. And as we look at this from a programmatic standpoint, you know, we've defined what the engagement group is and really what the objective is. So going back to this and saying, you know, what does this group do? What does this group? That's really what's on here, and I'll skim this because you guys can read this. But really it's about, you know, anywhere from the member identifies the savings, we execute the savings, we bring the category management or the service forward all the way into that active visibility. And just to give you a perspective, because of the financial situation I think most of us are in, we have moved our executive sponsor meetings to weekly. So on a weekly basis, we sit down with the C-suite and we go over projects, we go over short-term and long-term things. From an organizational standpoint, we do this twice a month, in which the work is visible, and it's not just supply chain presenting. Sometimes a certain project is highlighted, a certain barrier, but what it is really this organizational framework. So that's a little bit about the structure. The next set of slides is really kind of the process that we take in determining what is the non-labor spend pipeline. So one of the things we start off with is we start off with our internal numbers. What does our enterprise consist of? What's our total spend for non-labor? And of that, what % are we able to really pursue? A good example is, you know, there are maybe some commitments like lease agreements that we just can't touch this next year. So we shouldn't be looking at those. And so we figure out, you know, what's of our total expenses across all the GLs, across the entire enterprise, across each of the hospital, what is the total opportunity to pursue? And within that, how much can be benchmarked, which is a portion, because not everything can be benchmarked. And then what we do to determine kind of what the goal is we take a percent, and there is a methodology around this, of what we're able to pursue and what we're able to benchmark to say, hey, this is what we think our target is. And then we also know our end users have great ideas. And there is utilization management. There are known projects. So how do we take those together to come up with the end goal? And this just kind of breaks out another visualization of determining that pipeline. On an annual basis, generally probably 4 or 5 months before the end of the fiscal year, a month or so before the budgeting process starts, we sit down and we start going, okay, what have we done this year? What does our expense management look like? And we look at all of our partners, all of our benchmarking partners, and we funnel all of the things together, and category management does an extensive review. Business managers and leaders are engaged around the organization to go, where is our opportunity for the next year and multiple years, and then the goal is established. But it is a very, very much comprehensive process, taking the benchmarks, taking our actual spend, and identifying where we may have some low-hanging fruit, easy wins, and what projects may be more strategic and take a little bit longer. But this visual here really fits into essentially this bucket and this bucket. And then what we do from a tracking standpoint is every idea has a stage. Every initiative, we track it from a dashboarding perspective. And we have gone from what used to be 5 stages down to a simplified 3 stages in which it's an idea, it's under analysis, we don't know what the likelihood of this is. Or stage 2, it's an active work in progress. And stage 3 is it's been executed, it's been validated, it's been completed, and ideas that fall off get moved to stage 0. So we have a database in which we're tracking and aligning all of our non-labor spend initiatives. And the next slide here is really around a visualization of the non-labor spend dashboards. It's more of a graphic to illustrate that the dashboards have to be a living, breathing document that's visible. It's updated. There's standard work around there. It can be broken out into these different areas in terms of the visibility. But the dashboards is where we have found the greatest opportunity or the greatest alignment when we're able to say, hey, this area has brought in this savings, or this is how we're doing as an organization, or even the categorization of savings. As we go through the non-labor spend process, there's a lot of questions that the subcommittee asks. I think most notably, it's, is this product and service truly needed? To what degree? Is there equivalence? Is there a benchmark here? How does this service impact, quality service outcomes? Does this fit into a strategic imperative? Do we have an opportunity to standardize across the systems? Are each hospital doing something different, or each department's doing something different? And really trying to focus on the 80-20 rule. And when we say that, it's about spending the right energy, but I also think, to Eric's point earlier, it's about knowing what to let go of and where to push on and where to really get that partnership, because at the end of the day, the results have to be sustainable. In terms of how we have taken the different subcommittees and how we have bucketed or seen the type of savings, we have our traditional areas, PPI, medical supplies, minor equipment, so on. Then there's services. We went out, we did a major RFP, and we transitioned all of our external courier services. I think those things are a little bit more traditional. We're also finding a lot of opportunity in the technology area, and I think this area continues to be probably the fastest growing in terms of expenses, but also the fastest opportunity or the best opportunity to partner on. And it can even be things like utilization. How are we using our subscription licenses? Do we have standardized equipment? What is our service agreement? How much are we offering? What are we offering as a Stanford Medicine enterprise? We're also finding inconsistent practices and standards. I think furniture was a great example, but there's also payment terms. There's travel policies. There's use of different softwares and licenses. And then we also, at some point, depending on where we are in the year, we may look at temporary opportunities. And I think that's probably more relevant now during COVID, where we've said we're going to do a temporary reduction. We know that this project is probably not sustainable 2-3 years down the road, but this is what we need to do to just get some quick wins. And then it's about going back and looking at those and saying, how do we sustain those over the time? I think utilization management is a great example. So at Stanford, anytime we have an employee or an individual that's hired and they leave the organization, we don't have a great practice of discontinuing the phone services because it's transferred as a fee from the university to the hospitals. And so this is an example in which we found a practice in one area, and through our subcommittee structure, we were able to take that practice and we were able to make that visible and introduce changes enterprise-wide in which we are doing a better job of managing our telephone services. And so really this is about programmatic design is really where the conversation is. I think the biggest thing to note is non-labor spend, it is a multi-year journey. It is not a one and done. and you can't look at it annually. You have to look at non-labor spend as a strategic imperative. And I would argue not only is it a non-negotiable, but it is a requirement as to how we operate the financial health of our organization. We have to fundamentally look at our financial structures, and it's not just about cutting price on contracts. It is much more than that. It is about practice. It is about utilization, and it's about what we choose to procure and how we choose to procure that. It is a program that requires structure. It's got to be executive sponsored. It's about alignment. And one thing I want to stress here is if you have the opportunity to introduce this or to take your program to the next level, if you can get aligned incentives through the organization, that makes a big difference. And what I mean with that is, for example, performance goals and things like that, if that can be a shared performance goal that non-labor spend, whatever your dollar value is or whatever your goal is shared across the organization and it doesn't sit within supply chain, helps with that transformation of the culture. I think I've talked about the enterprise-wide viewpoint. And the last thing probably I want to mention here is that, data is key. Analytics and visualization has to be there. We have to make it visible. That's been a key component of our success on our journey. I think Mike had mentioned, we have saved probably close to $150 million over the past couple of years just at Stanford alone in the way that we've designed and operated our non-labor spend program. And I think that's it for Stanford. Happy to answer any questions and turning it back over to Mike.
Thank you very much, Amanda. That's what a great structure, and $150 million in savings. That's significant. I think what I really like and what I've heard from both of our presenters, right, is it's not just product cost. We've had some common themes around sustainability. I love your slide on what it is and what it is not, right? It's not a cost reduction program. It's a C-sponsored, executive-led initiative, and supply chain is the support of AHRMM. So wonderful presentation. Again, thank you both, Amanda and Eric, for all of this great information. So now I'd like to open the floor. We do have some questions, but I want to go ahead and remind our attendees to ask your question and do so by typing it in the Q&A box, which can be opened by hovering your mouse at the bottom of the WebEx browser. Again, clicking the ellipses icon and then clicking Q&A, typing your question in that box there. So let me start with a couple of questions here. Is risk management, this is to both panelists now, is risk management providing the outcomes, and how long are outcomes followed? Do they take into consideration preventative medicine measures on clinical outcomes? So this is a great question. I know there's a lot of discussion around supply chain and risk management. So would like both the panelists to just take a minute or two to speak to this question. Let me know if you'd like me to repeat it.
I'll go first. So from our side on Texas Children's today, risk management is not providing outcomes or followed up on outcomes. The way that works in our value analysis process is we'll implement a product, going through the new product orientation process, trials, making sure we're working with revenue cycle to make sure we have good charge capture. And I think I saw a question earlier about value-based agreements. And then we'll do look-back analysis about a year later, taking into account safety scoops, safety issues, and then vet the quality from that perspective. In addition to that, in our vendor management program, we do quarterly reviews to review product-related concerns and outcomes, which we include the physicians on, but nothing currently today with risk management.
Yeah. Hi, Mike. Hi, Eric, and everyone. So similar to Eric, we also do not have risk management as part of our committees on a formal basis, but through our value-based selection program, the way in which we evaluate the outcome part of the equation, per se, is we go back and we reassess, okay, 6 months ago we made this decision. How is it in terms of the utilization, and has there been any significant events or any outcomes? So generally the physician or the clinical sponsor comes back and we go through a report reviewing that type of information, but it is not formalized to the point that risk management is engaged.
Great, thank you both. Got a question here about total cost of ownership. Has total cost of ownership been a strategy for finding savings, such as assessing total cost between disposables and reusables?
So I can go first.
Yeah, I know there's been a lot of conversation around reusables, especially in light of scarcity. So, yeah,
yes.
Thanks, Amanda.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is part of our conversations. And this is, generally for these types of things, it's instruments and or medical equipment. And so it's handled through our VBS committees or a small element of the medical committee. And I would say absolutely it is. We try to calculate, when it's instrumentation, the cost of SPD, both the hard dollars and the soft dollars from an efficiency standpoint. So I would say absolutely there is. There's also an element of quality that we take a look at. And whether it's a disposable or reusable, are we using more of or are we using less of? From a per unit of service standpoint, but absolutely, you have to look at the total cost of ownership.
Yeah, and same thing's true here on Texas Children's. The most recent example I keep hearing of is, should we continue to mask our employees with disposable masks or use reusable masks? And there's a math problem for that. If I do reusable and it's good for 7 months, versus giving a mask to one of our 14,000 employees every day, you end up coming out with about a 10% swing on the reusable side. Your organization would have to swallow using reusable, but I think in COVID we've looked at that. Capital as well, we always look at total cost of ownership, buying new hardware, software, what it'll take to support that from an overhead perspective. Make versus buy. When we do those analysis that I spoke about earlier, it's really not about just the material costs or the FTE costs, but are there other components that we're not thinking of? And then the last project, which has really shed a light on kind of total cost of ownership, is our software rationalization project. There's so many savings when you get rid of all of these duplicative softwares on kind of your infrastructure support costs and some of your other license costs that you wouldn't have even known are connected without going through that process. So absolutely as well on our side.
Great, thank you both. I'm going to bundle a couple of questions here into a single question. I think they both deal with the very similar concepts. So many people are not welcome to change, right? Change is very difficult. So how do you convince staff and or executives to change procedures or to change vendors who they've been working with or utilizing for several years? And the tag on to that is, as you talk through that, if you could also just talk through some of your greatest hurdles to success. Is it internal politics? Is it supplier resistance? Is it this general resistance to change?
Yeah, that's a great question. Amanda, you want me to go first on that one?
Sure. Either way is fine.
Okay. So to answer that first question, on change management is a huge component of this, especially if you're like Texas Children's was, where really each department was kind of picking their own vendor, with no really formal selection process. I made the joke that we were kind of the biggest mom and pop shop in the Texas Medical Center area for so many years. For me, it really comes down to quick wins. You have to show that you can deliver on those quick wins. Showing the data is another component. It's really easy. Whenever we get into discussions with physicians all the time, and there's really these aha moments when you put the data in front of them. And so using that data to have collaborative discussions. Non-labor expense is a very involved project from all angles, supply chain, end user, physician. So having those collaborative discussions has been critical to the change management. And I think the biggest challenge, at least for Texas Children's, has been that organizational shift to people thinking that, we're attacking their vendors, and kind of slowly swaying that to, no, we're not attacking your vendors. We're really improving our service level, our quality of delivery to our clinicians and our support staff to deliver the best patient care to our patients at the end of the day. And it's been a successful journey, but it's been a slow journey. You have to know what hills to die on throughout that process.
Yeah, I would agree with Eric. From a change management perspective, it is the individual relationships, whether it's with people and leaders, with suppliers, and whenever you have to go out to bid or RFP and you bring that forward, there is that fear of, this is my comfort zone, this is who I've developed a relationship with, and this is who I have a trust with. And now you're asking me to go out and potentially do something different. And so fundamentally, the way that we approach this is it's a partnership. Supply chain is never going to tell you what to do, neither is category management. We're going to equip you with the data, with the analytics, with the research, the approach, and we're going to engage all the stakeholders from all the entities so we have the right people at the table so we can make the informed decision that's best for Stanford Medicine. And so with that approach and with that philosophy, yes, we have ran across resistance. We will continue to run across resistance, I'm sure of it. But we have also had many, many successes. And I think it goes back to fundamentally non-labor spend is not a one and done. We have to, within healthcare, fundamentally change our cost structure. We have to change the way in which we operate so we can be more efficient. And yes, there is an element of cost. I think if you don't acknowledge that and you only talk about the service and the quality piece, that's where people tend to be, a little bit more cautious in saying, do we really trust you? And it's like, yeah, there is a cost element, but at the same time, we're not going to ignore the value element. And it's about keeping things in balance. That has seemed to help. And a great example of this is when we transition, courier services, each one of the entities have their own, and within the entities, certain departments have their own, courier. So bringing everyone together with that close relationship and going out to a process and transitioning a vendor that has been, with Stanford for 20 plus years to a different vendor required a lot of change management. It required buy-in, and it was a slow but methodical process that the end result, service improved, quality improved, as well as price. It was all of those elements. But I would say change management is always going to be there. And one piece that I want to address in reference to change is getting the buy-in from your executive colleagues and the executive partners is really important. Showing that strategic value of supply chain is the right-hand arm from a financial perspective to help with the financial health of the organization is a key element to the change management buy-in.
Great responses. And we've got a number of other questions. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time. But I'd like to ask the audience, if you do have additional questions, please take the next couple of minutes to type them in the Q&A box. We are capturing all of these questions, and we will ask our esteemed panelists if they could take a few minutes over the course of the next week or so to respond to the open questions that we didn't get a chance to get to, but a lot of really good questions. Fabulous presentations, great detail, wonderful information. Eric and Amanda, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your busy schedules to speak to our audience today. Again, a great big thank you from AHRMM and from all of those who have attended, and certainly the number of people I no doubt know will go ahead and listen to this as an on-demand and in the on-demand platform. So again, thank you. And we'd also really like to thank our CQO movement sponsors for making today's webinar possible. Vizient, Cook Medical, Health Trust, Premier, Nexera and Acurity, and Pampers. I invite you to join us for the next webinar in our series, Conducting Business in a Virtual World. Look for more information to come from AHRMM about this webinar in the next week or so. Again, we weren't able to answer all the questions, so please type those questions in the Q&A box now. And again, we'll include the panelist responses and a takeaway tool following today's session. Also, please let us know what you think of the presentation session by completing the survey, which will pop up as an external site at the conclusion of today's webinar. Again, thank you for joining us and your continued hard work during these challenging times. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.